Hi guys, welcome to Love and Lust audiobooks channel, updated daily with great audiobooks, so please subscribe to me if you don't want to miss it.
Well, let's go to read this book, Seducing My Older Alpha Mate, Part 4, Chapter 31 to 40.
Chapter 31, taking Alice's paw. Suddenly, mutated rogues poured in from the gaps in the palace walls. They damaged the walls even more than they were, all while saying things they shouldn't have been able to.
I didn't know where they were coming from. It was all becoming a blur. Then I realized that they must have overheard what Olivia was saying about William being my mate and thought she was actually me.
Nobody said they were smart shifters. My thoughts were confirmed correct when Olivia and William tried to fight with them and were both instantly knocked unconscious by two rogues that had snuck up behind them.
I watched as they proceeded to throw them over their shoulders and walk back out through the hole in the wall. Not once did they glance in my direction. I let out my breath when the last of them was gone and turned to head toward Simon's at a quick pace.
Shit, that was interesting. Should I tell anyone? I didn't care about Olivia, but William didn't deserve this. Either way, they would be noticed missing soon enough.
The paranoia made me glance behind, but I still didn't see anybody or any rogue there. I still quickened my pace even faster. Then I sighed as I broke the tree line and saw Simon's palace wing in front of me. As soon as I burst through the door, I slammed it behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The fact that I had just seen William and Olivia taken was finally hitting me, but I could only think of two things. Was I next?
And where was Simon?
Simon's fault. I watched from a safe distance as Olivia and William were taken. Them getting taken was part of my plan, but I hadn't expected Alice to be right there. I had planned for Olivia and William to be at the grove where they would be close enough to the wall. I had even spent the time to break the wall in that area to encourage the mutated rogues to spend more time there. And it had worked out perfectly. It appeared that neither was injured and was just taken. Sophia walked up next to me and I turned to her, knowing that something was indeed wrong. "What is Alice doing here?" I hissed as quietly as possible. "That's not part of the plan. We just needed to get Olivia and William taken so that way we can reel in help against the lab from the Alpha King and Alpha Alex." I was fairly certain that as two Alpha Wolf descendants, the two of them would also be more valuable alive than dead, and was happy to see that I was right. The other reason I was on standby was in case the fight did get physical, but I was glad that it didn't. In fact, the plan was that Sophia was supposed to disguise herself as Alice, leading Olivia and William to the grove side. Olivia found Alice before I could do the swap, Sophia said in my mind. I was just on my way to warn you. Damn it, Olivia. I cursed under my breath. I think it was for the better, Sophia continued. Olivia is quite familiar with Alice, and I don't know if I would have been able to trick her quite so well. Sophia gestured to the actions in front of us, and I realized that she had a valid point. Olivia and William had still been taken, which was the main goal, and I was glad to see Alice hiding and not engaging in the capture. I guess there was no harm done. It was still going smoother than I could have hoped.
Come on, I know you really wanted to see Alice again, and now I brought her to you, Sophia smiled. You should be thanking me.
My eyes didn't leave. Alice, she must be angry with me. I felt a twinge of guilt. I deliberately made her think that I was leaving the palace. Yeah, she definitely looked angry when I approached the practice and saw her torturing the guards, Sophia informed me. I was glad that the rogues were gone as a small laugh slipped out. Thankfully, Alice didn't seem to hear me either. But Sophia must have heard something else in my tone as we began to follow Alice away from the grove.
Don't worry about it, Simon. She placed her hand in comfort on my back. Alice is not so hard-hearted to not forgive you.
You should be tolerant of both her and yourself. There is nothing wrong with seeing her again before leaving. I watched as Alice entered my palace. My feet kept propelling me forward, leading to her. Sophia stayed back in the trees, not wanting to interrupt. Originally, I wanted to pretend that I was not there at all because I was afraid that I would be reluctant to leave when I saw Alice. And I was right. I couldn't help it as I walked all the way up to the front door. But then I hesitated.
All of the lights were still off in my room when I opened the door slowly, so I stepped in and was surprised to see a large metal rod swinging straight for me.
I easily ducked and grabbed what looked to be my coat rack and yanked on it. I heard a yelp, and Alice appeared from behind the door as she stumbled towards me. My hands instantly dropped the rod and reached out to catch her. With a loud clang, the rod hit the floor, but I smiled as Alice fell into my arms. She seemed to gasp when I caught her and stared up at me in horror. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought you were a rogue out to get me, so I was defending myself."
Oh, back up. I answered with a smile. "Did you actually just apologize to me? Did you hit me in the head? Am I hallucinating?"
Oh, shut up. The sass came right back onto her face, and she stood up, trying to get away from me. But I wouldn't let her go.
"I thought you left," she blurted out.
Not yet. I paused. The exact date isn't set yet. Alice's eyes flashed, and I knew her well enough to know that she was frustrated. She opened and shut her mouth, but no words came out. Then she tried again.
"Simon." As soon as she said my name, my phone rang. Without letting go of her, I whipped my phone out of my pocket and put it to my ear with a swipe.
Alice looked even madder, if that was possible.
"This is Simon," I answered. "Simon, this is Alpha Alex." The frantic voice came over the speakers. "It's my boy William. He's been taken. I need you right away. You have to help me retrieve him."
That was fast. I saw Alice's eyes widen as she listened to the conversation.
Of course, I began, but my phone buzzed, and I looked down to see the Alpha King's number. "Hold on, Alex, I have another call from the Alpha King." I answered the Alpha King's call before even waiting for a reply from Alex.
"Simon, Olivia has been taken." The Alpha King sounded serious and somber, not as frantic as Alex. "I require your aid in planning a rescue. Come to my office as soon as possible."
And with that, he hung up. I quickly called Alex back and told him to meet me at the Alpha King's office, and we could make a plan there.
I realized that Alice was watching me and tried to look surprised at the abductions.
"Are you leaving again?" Alice asked, and my heart broke slightly at the tone of her voice. She was trying to cover the disappointment, but I knew her better than that. I reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear and rubbed my thumb mindlessly across her cheek. The warmth of the skin there was soothing to me. "Will you wait for me to return?" I asked softly. "Have you thought any more about your vision of life in the human world?"
"I don't have time to think about that." Alice scoffed.
"Make the time then." I looked into her fierce eyes as they stared back at me in a challenge. Because once you have a plan and have truly thought about it, then you could go to the base to find Sophia. Sophia can arrange everything for you and give you that life that you have always dreamed of.
"What if that's not what I dream of anymore?" she questioned fiercely.
"What do you dream of then?" I couldn't help but ask. Her fire flickered slightly as her shyness appeared again, just for a moment, and then she shook her head and gritted her teeth. "I will be waiting here for you to return." She gritted her teeth and looked down at her feet again, and my heart rose. This girl would be the death of me. This is definitely a hallucination, because there is no way that someone as amazing as you actually exist. I tease.
She stopped moving and stared at me. I could see the fight in her eyes as she debated whether I was teasing or being serious. Knowing what was possible to come, I leaned in and brushed my lips against her cheek in a soft kiss. I heard her gasp as my lips touched her skin, and when I pulled away, she was already flushed.
I'm teasing you, but that doesn't mean what I say isn't true, I replied softly, and I grabbed her chin and tilted it up to look at me. You are the most beautiful and strong woman that I have ever met. Her eyes glazed in shock for a moment, but then they began to close slightly as she rose on her tippy toes and leaned in. I realized that she was going in for a kiss, a true kiss. I had told myself that I wouldn't kiss her or give in to these feelings or this relationship until I knew that I would return for her. But the temptation of her lips as they got closer and closer was getting harder for me to deny. Our lips were almost touching, only a breath away. Her eyes were closed, but I kept mine open so that I could stare at her beautiful face. Then, just as our lips were about to touch, "Alice, I know you are in there." A yell came from outside, and I instantly pulled back, coming to my senses. "Get out here now." Alice's eyes shot open and she quickly stepped back, looking embarrassed as her cheeks flushed. I walked to the window and looked outside to see James pacing in the front yard, looking madder than I had ever seen him. And I had made him pretty mad. Alice walked up next to me, making sure to keep her distance, and looked out at James as well. I watched as she clenched her jaw and rolled her eyes. "Olivia has been taken, and I know you had something to do with it." James didn't seem to be happy about being ignored. His attitude was starting to piss me off as well, so I turned to go deal with him. But Alice grabbed me by the arm. "He'll give up soon." Alice said in a knowing voice that kid can never stay focused on anything for too long. Sure enough, James only paced one more time by the front door and then took off in a hurry, back towards the grove. I relaxed slightly, but I knew that this wasn't the end of it. "Please stay away from Jane." I didn't like the way he had been acting. "Oh, don't tell me what to do." She crossed her arms over her chest. "But you don't have to worry about James. I don't go near him unless I am looking for trouble."
Sounds good to me, I smiled. "Just try not to get into any trouble while I'm gone then. And if you do, make sure that you teach James a lesson about what it's like to mess with."
"Are you really so confident in me?" she asked, looking back up at me and giving me one of her sweet, genuine smile. "Of course I am," I said, adding a nod for emphasis. "You are my prize student, after all." Her smile doubled in size, and I took a mental picture of it to cherish as I turned around and walked out of the door. Possibly forever. Chapter 32, Once and for All. Alice's pub. I felt the huge smile that was spread across my face falter slightly as I watched Simon walk out of the door. There was something that felt so final about it, and it was eating at my stomach. But the fact that he had once again said that I was his best student kept my spirits high. I had never thought that he was serious when he said all of that stuff, but now at this point in our history, I was sure he was telling the truth. He really did believe that. He had never looked down on me, even from the beginning, when I was a weak little thing with no endurance and no muscles. He saw the potential that I had known was there all along. But he truly made me recognize it by forcing me to show myself in front of everyone. His teaching style may have pissed me off from time to time, but I had to admit that the results spoke for themselves. Now I was able to release my anger and aggression, which allowed me to gain the freedom I needed to come and go from the palace. Simon had never restrained me, but now he was leaving the palace. The idea of him out there planning an attack against the mutants was enough to keep me up all night. I was as confident in him as he was in me, but that didn't keep me from worrying, especially the fact that he was keeping me out of it. That would not work for me. I walked out and found James looking for me in the grove. "There you are," his voice growled as he marched toward me. He pushed me backwards and I stumbled, only to regain my footing again. "I knew I'd find you here, you pathetic freak." What the hell did he want now? "You're the reason Olivia's missing, I know it," he sneered, getting closer to my face in an attempt to intimidate me. So that was it. He thought I caused Olivia to be taken. I mean, I didn't. But I also didn't stop it from happening. I stared him down. If I was as strong as Simon believed, he couldn't hurt me anymore. What makes you say that? This forced James to growl even more. He jabbed a finger in my face. He was really testing me, but I elected to remain calm. I pushed his hand out my way. "Olivia came to my room asking about you, and the night our mother took you outside the palace walls, and now she's missing. I don't think it's a coincidence." He was seething. He really thought I did this. I shrugged, which pissed him off even more. "Maybe it isn't." James snarled and lunged forward, pushing me against a nearby tree. How did I always get put in this position? "Stop with your games. Were you not here in the grove when it happened?" I glared at him. I was here, but only because Olivia forced me to be. She told me she wanted to fight me, but it was clear she wanted to kill me. Only she never got the chance to. James slammed me against the tree trunk, causing me to wince slightly. "You'll pay for it." "I'll make sure of it." "Oh, will you now?" I teased. "Funny you'd do that for someone who didn't even want to tell you of her plans. She finds you unreliable, so much so. William was the one to help her." I saw the anger flicker in James's eyes. He wasn't just mad anymore, he was downright furious. Then I watched as he contemplated on what to say, and in doing so, his grip loosened on me. I took the opportunity to kick him in the shin and break free. This was all too much. I couldn't help in this state, not with everyone's eyes solely on me. So I returned to my room and climbed into bed. I couldn't wait for Simon in his, as I promised. The anticipation of his return would kill me. I laid still for what felt like hours, but in all actuality was only minutes. No matter what I did, I couldn't fall asleep. Questions kept turning in my mind. Did Simon actually want to kiss me? Why did he leave to go save Olivia? And on top of that, what in hell was he so busy with these days? Then my thoughts turned darker. Was he really going to leave me like this? Why do the people from the lab want me so badly? Could all of this be related? I needed to find an answer to all of these questions, and the only way would be to come up with a plan. I finally fell asleep as soon as I came up with one. First thing in the morning, I snuck out of my room and walked to where I could hear a commotion. Sure enough, there were multiple warriors getting prepared to head out. I knew the Alpha King would not allow his precious daughter to be gone long before attempting a rescue. A warrior began to walk in my direction, and I quickly hid around the corner. Then, as soon as she cleared the wall, I hit her in the back of the head to quickly knock her out, just as Simon had taught me. Dragging her to a room close by was sadly not as easy, but somehow I managed it. I quickly stripped her off her outer clothes before she could wake up and put them on. I was glad that it was a woman that had come around the corner, because even her clothes were slightly big for me. Then I locked the small door and shut it behind me, making it so that way nobody could open it and find her, but she could still get out when she finally came to. I nervously brushed the clothes out and pulled the hat down further, putting my hair up into it, and walked around the corner. There were still multiple warriors stuffing their packs, so I went to the middle and fiddled with the pack that I had found. As they started to file out, I followed suit. I was attempting to stay hidden in the middle of the pack. I knew that if Simon saw me at all, I would be spotted. The best thing about being a maid all of those years meant that it was extremely easy for me to blend in and eavesdrop. So we're going to the base for the mutated rogues. One of the men in front of me couldn't help but gossip to the man next to him. I had picked 2 men to walk behind, knowing that their height would hide me from the front. Yep, the second man growled out, man of many words. That one. Do you think it's true that it's run by humans? The first one asked, we might have bigger issues if the humans are getting smart enough to be involved in something like this. Yep, the second man replied again. I thought about what the first man said and about what would happen if all of these warriors were to attack the lab. Between humans, rogues, and wolves, there was sure to be a lot of loss, a lot of death. And for the first time, I cared. Jones popped. I put on my old set of fighter's clothes, impressed that they still fit my old body. Running food for these wolves had somehow kept me in shape. And after my conversation with Simon the other day, I realized that as long as the lab in Victoria survived, Alice would never be safe. And if there was one thing I wanted more than anything, it was to promise Alice a future. However, avenging Alice's mother would be a bonus. That damn Victoria, crazy, malicious, vindictive, psycho Victoria. She would do anything to prove that she was better than Alice's mother and had done more in the field of shifter research than anyone else. This included some unethical tactic. It was Victoria who executed Alice's father the year that her mother escaped. She had done it to purposely make Alice's mom suffer. Plus, she thought of her as a failure for falling in love with one of the experiments. Despite that, though, she wasn't able to outright get rid of Alice's mother because she was the only one who had mastered the technology to turn humans into normal shifters. So, as much as Victoria hated her, she needed her. And now she needed Alice. Victoria would ironically always be dependent on that family despite her jealousy. I hadn't told Alice, but I had put in my notice with the palace and I was leaving today. My plan was to get to the lab and find Victoria and end her. What if Victoria died? There would be no more leadership in the lab, and its experiments and plans would at least be suspended, if not canceled. And that would make me feel better about Alice's safety going forward. With Alice's safety came the freedom for her to choose what life she wanted. I had always thought that she would pick the human world, but now I wasn't so sure, and I wanted to make sure that it was her choice to make. Even if she chose the shifter world, I would support her. Because despite my thoughts on shifters, I could see the change that had overcome her since she had begun her secret training with Simon. There were some things that I would simply never understand about Alice as a human, and I was glad to see that he understood that other side of her. In some ways, Simon even knew her better than me, and while I didn't love that feeling that the little girl didn't need me anymore, I was happy to see someone just as strong compete for my place. There was commotion throughout the palace, even for this early in the morning, so I walked slower in an attempt to discern what was happening. The Alpha King has ordered an attack on the mutant rogue base, an excited voice stated, "About damn time." I heard they kidnapped Princess Olivia and that it's a rescue mission. The young lady said from beside him, "I don't give a damn what the reason is. I'm just excited that we're going to..." I looked over at the man and saw that he was fairly young. Young warriors seem to always crave action until they actually experienced it. I'm tired of them picking us off one by one if we leave the palace. It would be nice to not have to look over our backs constantly. The girl said in agreement, though. She did sound more hesitant. So Olivia was missing and the Alpha King was planning an attack. That was great news, even the Olivia part, because let's be honest, she was an absolute cunt from as far as I could tell. And this attack would be the perfect distraction that I needed to allow me to sneak into the lab unnoticed. I walked past the commotion without a second glance and walked out of the palace gates, preparing myself to make my stand once and for all. Chapter 33, 14 hours. Simon's Pop. Ellen and I walked to the car, and I could feel the excitement of the coming battle start to creep into my blood. Tell me the plan again, just so I can be sure. Alan repeated as he walked beside me, just as jumping. We drive to the valley where the lab is located and then proceed to sneak into the lab dressed as rogues. I explained as simply as I could. And it truly was a simple plan. But in my experience, the simpler, the better. The more you overthought it, the more that could go wrong. We slid into the car seats and I, of course, took the driver's seat. I started the inconspicuous car and let it idle for a moment as I tried to make a mental checklist of everything before I left. We had thought about taking a Jeep for the mountain terrain, but I was worried the noise and the size would make it too noticeable. What the hell? Ellen suddenly exclaimed as he jumped out of his seat and threw open the back door, followed by a body. I looked in confusion at the body, seeming to recognize it immediately. Alan slid in the back seat next to them and ripped off the hat, allowing the beautiful long silver hair to flow down. The excitement of seeing Alice was quickly overshadowed by the irritation and confusion over why she was here. Alice turned and looked defiantly at me, and I found my irritation ebb slightly despite myself. It was hard to stay mad at her for one of the qualities that I admired and adored about her. We sat there in silence for another moment before I finally gathered myself and broke it. "Waylon, could you leave the car for a moment, please?" I asked calmly. I saw him glance at Alice suspiciously, but he followed my request, shutting the door softly behind him. I had to admire the man. He had never stared at Alice like a piece of meat like the other 90% of wolves that I saw around her. I slipped out of the driver's seat and into the back next to her. Alice continued to look at me, not flinching in the slightest, my perfect little firecracker. I couldn't help but smile, but this seemed to set Alice off. "I don't understand you," she pouted cutely, folding her arms across her chest. "You claim that you don't like Olivia at all, but yet here you are rushing off to rescue her. What does Olivia's life or death have to do with you?" "Olivia wasn't the only one taken. William was too," I reminded her. "And didn't William declare you as his maid? And from what I can tell, he actually treats you decent. So why aren't you running off to save him?" "What does that have to do with me?" she said coolly, and I couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. "I see still ruthless as ever, sweet and lovely on the surface, but your heart is as cold as stone. Then why don't you warm me up?" She teased, and I watched in pleasure as her cheeks flushed. I grabbed her tightly by the wrist and hip and pulled her up onto me and wrapped my arms around her. Alice responded much quicker than normal, wrapping her arms tightly around my upper body and burying her face into my neck. We sat in the car like this for a while, just enjoying the closeness that we so rarely got in the warmth of each other's bodies. I was unsure of when I might get this opportunity again. Alice was quiet in my arms, but I could hear her heart beating faster and could feel her breaths coming quicker and quicker against my neck. I looked down and realized that she was wearing the full warrior's outfit, not just the hat, and it clicked in my head. She intended to follow us in some ways. I was glad. When I had first seen her in the car,
I was worried that she was making a break for it while everyone was distracted.
That she intended to leave and go to the human world or wherever she had planned.
Now that she had the information from her mom and Sophia, she was even more unstoppable. But yet, here she was about to follow me into a battle.
I couldn't let that happen. What am I going to do with you? I mumbled into her shoulder, but instead of getting angry, she just snuggled in closer. I didn't even think that was possible. I turned my head and took a deep breath of her hair, savoring it for as long as possible before I would have to enact my plan to make sure that Alice would not be able to follow us.
I'm sorry, I whispered softly, but I knew she couldn't hear me. She was already drifting off.
Alice's pup. I jerked up, startling awake, as I found myself still in the back of the car. With a quick glance around, I realized that I was alone.
No Alan.
No Simon.
Shit. How did I fall asleep at a time like this? I wanted to smack myself in the forehead, even as I thought it. It shouldn't really surprise me that Simon would resort to unfair tactics to stall me.
I sighed and slid to the edge of the seat, pushing the car door open.
Except it didn't open.
Double shit.
I quickly pushed against the door harder and even resorted to leaning my entire body weight against it, yet it didn't budge. There was no sign of Simon or anyone else around the car that could possibly be keeping me pressed inside.
Getting to my knees, I leaned as close to the window as I could, attempting to see the side of the car.
And sure enough, I could just see the steel plates against the car,
sealing me inside.
I cursed out loud and sat back down in the middle of the car. Why did I have to put myself in this situation? I was blending in. I was getting by just fine. If I had continued, I was sure that Simon wouldn't have even noticed or found me. But when I saw him getting into the car, logic had failed me. And without thinking, I had approached the car. I was hoping that Alan would be less observant and wouldn't notice me, but obviously I was wrong. I scolded myself again. I knew that Simon was planning something. I could tell by how quiet he was. But I was so surprised and enthralled with the hug that I wasn't able to pull myself away. The sleepless night, worrying about him, must have made me even more sympathetic toward him. Boy, who would have ever thought that a guy would be able to trick me using a hug? That was usually my tactic. Most of the time, I truly believed and accepted that Simon had made me stronger. But at this moment, I felt weak. I could physically leave this palace and survive on my own, but I just didn't feel the need to anymore. Tired of throwing my pity party, I attempted to find another way out of the car. As soon as I climbed into the front seat, I noticed Simon's cell phone and wallet sitting on the driver's seat. Without hesitation, I opened his phone and saw that the last message sent was to my phone. I pulled my phone out as well and confirmed it. Then I pulled it up on my own phone and read the message. After 14 hours, the car doors will automatically open. There is a bank card in my wallet that you can take and use to support you in the human world. If after 14 hours I haven't returned, please take this card and go directly to the human world to live. I stared at my phone screen in anger and in shock. There was no way that Simon seriously just said a possible forever goodbye to me in a text message. I grabbed his phone and opened it again, hoping to find something else. Anything else? My heart leaped as I saw that I was in luck when I opened the messages to me. I saw the one that was sent to me, but I also saw that there was one in his drafts that he hadn't sent. He must not have had the courage. Because I'm sorry, Alice, I don't want to leave, but I want you to have your freedom more than my wants. I can't give you me until I can give you life. Please understand. Because the corners of my eyes pricked, but I ignored them. This man seriously thought that he could leave and take on the laboratory without me.
and that I would be fine with that. Reading his words made me kick myself for not telling him my feelings sooner. It was obvious he felt the same, and knowing how he felt gave me more confidence than I had ever felt with him. He might have had this plan, but there was no way I was staying away now.
There was no way I was staying away from him. I gritted my teeth and forced a mutation. 30 minutes later, I huffed as I took deep breaths in, my forehead covered in sweat, even in my mutated state. I wasn't able to escape the car. I collapsed back down in the back seat, right beside Simon's wallet and phone. My breathing started to calm back down, and I suppressed the mutations back inside. They were of no use. I would have to wait out the rest of the time. I was secretly hoping that I had slept through most of it. It did seem that it was already starting to get late. My fingers drummed against the leather car seats and into the silence. I still hadn't seen anyone and nothing around the car. They were probably all at the lab by now. I grabbed Simon's wallet, attempting to distract myself from thoughts of how the attack was going. The first thing I noticed as soon as I opened it up was that the picture was missing. I rummaged through the rest of the wallet and definitely didn't find it. Maybe he had taken it with him. It seemed like one of those things that he always liked to keep on him. I also saw the bank card that he had mentioned in his text and ran my hands over it. Even though I was the daughter of an alpha, I had never really had money or nice things, so for Simon to just willingly hand it out made it that much more serious. My eyes suddenly caught my own name, and I realized that the card was under me. How was that possible? How long had he been planning this? My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it, another sign of his feelings for me and how honest he was being about wanting to build a future or a life for me in the back of my mind. I just prayed that my future had him. I wanted to roll my eyes at myself, but I just couldn't help it. I grabbed the phone next, convinced that it must have something interesting in it at least. But much like his personality, his phone was clear, concise, and upfront. The fascinating part was when I opened his camera gallery. I was shocked to find myself looking back up at me. Even though I had no recollection of Simon taking pictures of me and had never noticed him with a phone in his hand, here were multiple pictures depicting our time training together. Most of the photos involved me being hurt since the beginning of our training, included a lot of that. There was the one where I had blood on my hands when we first met and bloody hands from when I fell during one of my running laps. Then there was a picture of me with my small face covered in dirt that I couldn't place, and even one with my beard. I quickly swiped. I definitely did not need to be reminded of that hideous thing. It blew my mind that I didn't know that Simon had secretly took all of these pictures, and I found myself asking why. Why did he take these pictures? Why save them? Who were they for himself? Simon must be hiding something. I continued to look around his phone and wallet and then found something folded multiple times tucked into his wallet. As I unfolded it, I realized that it looked familiar. When I undid the final fold, I realized that it was a page from my mother, written in her own writing. However, I never found it in the books she had given to me. Where did Simon get this? I couldn't help but think about the day Simon helped me open my hard drive. Perhaps it came from that hard drive. This was obviously printed. The top of the page was titled Depressing Werewolfizations. I quickly scanned the page and realized that it was instructions from my mom on how to suppress my mutations and live a normal human life in the human world. Simon must have put it in there for even more information for me, despite the fact that I had made my decision already. I read the paper. There was nothing better to do anyway, and it was good information to have.
There was a small addition that my mom had added to the bottom of the page that I could just barely make out. After minutes of deciphering, I realized what it said. It read,
Thus, the truth made me strong and allowed me to find a way to destroy the laboratory.
I stared at it in silence and turned the page over looking for this solution. And that's when it hit me that Simon took that part.
He truly intended to destroy the lab and had done his homework to figure out how. About the third or fourth time that I was reading the piece of paper, I heard some creaking from outside, hurrying to the window. I saw the steel plates disappearing one by one. The 14 hours were up and I was ready. Chapter 34. Transform Alice's Poem. I opened the door and took a deep breath, enjoying my freedom. The silence seemed heavy all around me. I turned my head to look toward the direction of the closest human village with the information and money in my hands. I really could go. I could leave now and never look back, make a life for myself where no one knew me and no one judged me. With no doubt in my heart, I turned back around and faced the direction of the human lab. It honestly wasn't even a question. I would get Simon. The reality that had it been 14 hours and Simon still wasn't back had my stomach rolling over. But I kept it under control, knowing that I had to keep my head on if I wanted to execute this correctly. At this point, I have to assume that Simon is trapped in the lab. I wouldn't call it a rescue because I don't think Simon would ever need rescuing in his entire life. But he could use an assist for sure. It wasn't hard to track the worn earth back to its source. I knew that the lab wasn't far from the palace, but I was still surprised when I happened upon it so fast. That part I wasn't prepared for. I ducked behind a tree and hid from the line of mutated rogues that I could see surrounding a simple-looking building. There were many more of these extra strong rogues than I had counted on, and no distraction in sight. Where were the Alpha King's warriors? Had they already been scared off? Either way, there was no way I was going to just walk into the building with the way they were set up. Now, how had Simon and Ellen gotten in? I tried to think as Simon would. If the Alpha King wouldn't provide a distraction, then I would have to create one myself. Nothing was stopping me today. I backed up slightly so that the mutated rogues wouldn't see me moving around and walked until I found an area that had decent amenities for setting a trap. Without supplies, it was hard to make one, but I managed. There was a small mud hole similar to the one at the lake that I happened to find. I walked around it to see how wide it was and made mental notes of that. Then I grabbed as many loose leaves and branches as possible and threw them on top of the mud, disguising it as a normal forest floor. It was a simple trap, but it would work, especially for the mutants. They were stronger and larger than normal shifters, but the madness that set in took away their processing capabilities. They weren't stupid necessarily, but they weren't clever either. I walked back closer to the guard circle that surrounded the building and moved back and forth between the trees until two of them noticed and branched away from the group. Proud of myself, I slowly led them to the trap. I stood directly across from the mud hole in the wide open, so as soon as the two rounded the trees and saw me, they leaped forward with growls, not even looking at the ground. A loud squelch echoed out as both of them fell into the mud at the same time. One looked surprised and fought to get out, but the other howled out in anger. And howled. And howled.
Shit, they didn't sink fast enough. And with how the one was howling, it wouldn't be long until others started to show up to see what the commotion was about. I had to get out of there. I turned around and cursed out loud. There were already two more rogues coming at me from that direction.
Well, I wasn't going down without a fight.
I let a growl rip out of my own chest and felt my face begin to sprout fur as my fangs and claws popped out. The most important things first. The first mutant hesitated seeing my mutation, and I took the opportunity to pounce. Before he even had time to react, I sank my teeth into his neck and ripped. The blood came spewing out and soaked me before I had a chance to react. I had never expected a neck to hold that much blood. I jumped agilely back, preparing myself for the second attacker. They didn't even seem to flinch as they walked slowly past their dead comrade, but he stared at me with interest. He was being much more cautious after what I had just done, and I didn't blame him. The warm blood coating the front of me made me want to gag, but I held it together. A low growl came from behind me, and I cursed again. I chanced a quick glance out of my peripheral, not wanting to take my eyes off of the wolf that was already engaging with me. There were now 3 more on the other side of me. Shit. He wasn't acting cautiously. He was biding time until reinforcements could arrive. Maybe they were smarter than we were giving them credit for. I braced myself, me against 2 mutated rogues. I was confident, but against 4 of them, I wasn't sure I would win. But again, I wouldn't go down without a fight. I widened my stance and braced myself, angling my body. I attempted to keep all 4 wolves in my line of sight at once, but it was impossible. They had the flanking method down to an art. All of the wolves stood up alert and disengaged from me, making a chill run down my spine. What was happening next? I looked in the direction they were looking and saw an older woman walking up into the group, staring at me as if she had just won a prize. She whispered something that I couldn't hear, and before I knew what was happening, one of the super quick mutants leaped forward and hit me on the head, knocking me out. My vision started to fade to black. At least I would get to see Simon now. But just as that thought transpired, there was a blinding light, and my vision snapped back into focus. The growl I let out was louder and fiercer than any before, because I had transformed fully. More severe pain hit me than ever before, and I howled in pain, feeling like my whole body was changing. When it stopped, I felt like I had become another me. I looked down at my feet and noticed the large silver paws. The strength that flooded through me felt incredible. And I looked down and around at all of the shocked faces. At seeing my true wolf form, the older woman looked excited but worried and hurried back towards the building and away from the fighting as the mutated rogues descended once more upon me. I grinned. The mutated rogues were larger than normal wolves, but I was even larger than them. A couple of the rogues stepped back, not sure of what to do. They still were obviously not supposed to hurt me, but now that I was a wolf, I wouldn't be so easy to subdue. The remaining rogues charged at me. My wolf eyes could see more clearly and watched as they attacked almost in slow motion. White spit dripped from their mouths, making them appear rabid, and I noticed missing patches of fur on others. They grew closer, and I prepared myself for a fight. Not used to my wolf body, I had a hard time figuring out how to fight the most efficiently, and I tired quickly. I managed to bat away the first few that attacked straight at me, but then the exhaustion hit. I used the last of my strength to swipe out with my claws, forcing them all back. Before I knew what was happening, I shifted back to my human form and dropped to my knees. I sucked in the air, trying to get my head to stop spinning. I heard a growl above me and rolled to my side without a thought. There was a large mutated rogue standing above me. I could see the madness in his eyes as the saliva dripped onto me. His claws seemed to extend even further as he raised his hand in front of him. Then he drew it back, ready to strike. A gunshot exploded through the trees, and I watched as the hole that appeared in the middle of the rogue's forehead started dripping red. The eyes that were once wild and mad were now blank and distant. The body collapsed at my side.
I tilted my head on the earth to try and see who had saved me, but I already knew. Sure enough, even from the upside down, I could tell that it was Joan standing at the edge of the trap area that I had led them to.
Another shot rang out, and I heard another body fall. I knew that Joan was a warrior once, but to see her in action with all of her gear was something else entirely. She was the definition of a badass, and I was reminded of who I had learned my true strength.
The rest of the rogues took off, realizing that they were no match for Joan and her wicked aim. I watched as she ran up to me.
"Alice, are you all right?" Joan asked frantically, sounding more like the motherly woman that I knew so well.
"Yes," I said, managing to sit up. "Did you see me? Did you see that I shifted? I was a wolf."
"Yes, I saw Alice, and you were beautiful." Joan leaned down and helped me to my feet. My legs shook, but they held my weight. The shift must have sucked all of your energy, though. You look exhausted. "It's getting better," I noted, and it did seem like my legs were getting stronger. The longer I stood, "That's good, because we have to get you out of here." Joan grabbed the top of my arm and started to pull me away. But I stopped and pulled it out of her grasp. "No," I stood my ground. "I can't go, Joan. I'm looking for Simon. He came here over 14 hours ago and never came back. I have to find him." Joan took one look at my face and studied it. Then she sighed and started walking back in the direction of the laboratory. "Follow me, then?" "Thank you," I exclaimed and quickly fell into step behind her. "You have to promise that you will follow my instructions and do as I say, though," Joan begged as we walked.
I promise anything to make Joan happy. I wasn't the best at following orders, but for her, I would try.
Instead of walking towards the front of the lab, where I was first, Joan led me around to one of the sides. I followed in silence, knowing that she must know more about the place than me, and trusting her leadership. I looked around as we walked, noticing that most of the mutated rogues that were standing around as guards were now missing. That made getting inside easier, but that also made me worried. I couldn't help the uneasy feeling that spread over me. With Joan's guidance, the two of us were able to sneak into a side door without being noticed again. The door had blended in with the side of the building and would not have been noticeable if we didn't know it was there. As soon as the door closed behind us, I took a deep breath and focused on moving more quietly.
Now that we were inside of the lab, I didn't want to get caught before finding Simon. Then all of this would have been for nothing.
We walked down a long, all-white hallway that seemed to glow in the fluorescent lighting. There was definitely no hiding in this place. Joan motioned for me to stop and pointed at a large glass window that was right in front of us. I slowed and peeked my head around the corner, prepared to pull it back just as fast as there were people.
I will never forget what I saw at first sight.
There were people in the room, but they were of no threat to us. I felt my stomach clench and turn over as I looked at the bodies of half human, half wolves lying on lab beds with tubes sticking out of them in every direction. Even though we were standing in silence, I seemed to hear the scream of their pain through my head. They looked miserable. I pulled my head back from the window as a wave of nausea hit me. Seeing them all lying there like that was much harder than reading or hearing about it in my mother's hard drive. Joan seemed to notice my reaction and quickly pulled me past the window and to the door that was at the end of the hall. Joan cracked it open and stuck her head out when she was sure the coast was clear. Then she gestured to me, and I followed her through it. In front of us were 3 more halls in each direction. and I was suddenly glad that Joan had shown up when she had. If it was just me in here, it would take me days to find what I was looking for. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, though, and took a right, taking us deeper into the lab from what I could tell.
There was still no sign of anybody else in the halls, which I took as a slight miracle. My distraction may have been useful for two things.
There was another window in front of us, and I walked slowly up to it. I was more hesitant to look into this room now after seeing what had been in the last room, but I forced myself to creep my head around the edge and gasped.
William and Olivia were there. They looked to both be in comas, passed out, and hooked up to multiple machines that were reading numbers I didn't understand. At least they didn't look like they were in pain like the last group.
Well, in William's case, anyway.
I was just about to signal to Joan to take a look for herself when a loud siren erupted, and lights began to blink on the ceiling.
There was a commotion as the siren continued, and I looked at Joan in panic. There was movement in the room that William and Olivia were in, and my attention was pulled back to it. And then my eyes locked on the sight in front of me. Simon, Chapter 35, Too Little Too Late. Alice's pull. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Simon was in the room along with someone else, and he was waking up Olivia and William, pulling them up out of their beds and handing them to the second person. Without thinking, I smacked my hand on the window and watched as Simon's eyes snapped up and met mine. They widened in shock as he stared at me. He stopped what he was doing and rushed to the window. I saw his mouth moving like he was trying to call out to me, but I couldn't hear him. Alice, we have to go, Joan suddenly announced, pulling me back to the events that were happening. I turned my attention back to Joan and noticed the rogues that had appeared in the hallway. They were blocking the door that we had entered through, so the only way out was back. Joan and I both backed up a couple of steps, crossing back into the window's path. I glanced inside and saw that older lady standing there talking to Simon. Then her eyes locked with mine.
A growl from one of the rogues focused my attention as they approached. And by the time I looked back into the room once more, it was empty.
Where had Simon gone?
There's another door at the end of this hallway that exits out the back of the laboratory. Alice.
Joan pulled her gun up and adjusted it, making the rogues in front of us balk. When I give the order, you will make a run for it. But so I began, but she cut me off.
Remember your promise, Alice, Joan exclaimed in an irritated voice, silencing me.
I nodded in understanding.
Good, Joan aimed slowly and let off a perfect shot. The shot seemed to echo down every hall and surround us, round us. I took off without a second thought. Joan knew what she was doing, and I couldn't help her if we were both caught. My feet were flying down the hall, and I rounded a corner. I could see the daylight pouring in from an open door and watched as people ran out of it. Then I recognized Simon among the group escaping. I found him. Just as I was about to call out to him, a body stepped into my path, and I bounced off, crashing to the floor. It was another large rogue, and behind him stood the older lady that just seemed to keep reappearing. Who was she? I glanced between their legs and watched as the last set of feet escaped the hall with the door closing behind them. I heard another gunshot echo around me and remembered that I was supposed to be escaping. Dealing with one mutated rogue and an old lady wouldn't be too difficult. I stood up and mentally prepared myself to let out my mutations right before I released the claws. The old lady spoke to me for the first time. "Hello, Alice," she said in a soft voice, stopping me in my track.
How did she know my name?
The mutated rogue stepped aside, and I got a clear view of the older lady. She looked kind of familiar, but I couldn't place her.
Perhaps she had been in some of the videos on my mother's hard drive. "I've been waiting for you," she continued in the same soft voice. "I'm glad that they finally brought you to me." I couldn't help but ask, but I had come on my own accord. No one brought me. "I am speaking of Simon and his allies," of course, she replied with a small smile. "He is my accomplice. Why else would he have just left without checking on you?" Her words soaked in slowly. "Simon was working for her or friends with her. There was no way you would never do that to me." But then I thought about how he was acting lately, how he had refused to admit feelings for me, how I had seen him talking with her in that room, how he was rescuing William and even Olivia of all people. And suddenly it didn't seem that unreasonable. Was he playing me this whole time? "You didn't truly think he liked you, did you?" she asked in a sympathetic voice, and I looked back at her. "He put a bug in the Alpha King's bedroom for me, and I have heard all of their plans." "You're lying," I sneered. She had to be. I saw how Simon looked at me, how he cared for me when no one else, other than Joan, did. The woman reached into her coat. I readied myself, unsure of what she was about to pull out, but then relaxed when she pulled out what appeared to be a tape recorder. I tilted my head in confusion, and she smiled as she pressed down on one of the buttons. Static cut through the speakers on the small device in her hands, and then, clear as day, a voice came out. "So what's the plan?" My heart stopped. I'd know that voice anywhere. It was Simon. "If Alice is what they want, then I think she is our best bet at getting to them. We could use her as bait, talent." Bait. I felt a sinking feeling grow in my stomach. He wanted to use me to get to the lab. "We could gather some soldiers, and while you infiltrated to save Alice from the inside, we could attack them from the outside." The second voice was unmistakably the Alpha King. "Then you could find my dear uncle and notify me of your exact location, so that way I am able to save you." "That plan sounds like it could work," Simon continued. He sounded so calculated, so cold to the idea. "How do we get Alice to agree to be bait?" "I'll leave that to you," the Alpha King replied. His laugh sent a shiver through me. Muffled sounds and noises made it difficult to know what was going on. But soon enough, the Alpha King spoke again. "Come, let us begin preparations. The sooner we start, the sooner this can all end." I heard shuffling, and then a door opened before closing once more. The woman stopped the recording and grinned even wider. What was happening? My sense of nausea tripled, and I felt like I might really throw up this time. "You see, he never cared about you. He wasn't your friend, but I can be," she said, stepping closer to me, "just as I was your mom's friend." "My mom?" My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. Yes, she reached out and took my hand. It was completely numb and didn't even recognize her touch. "Come with me, and I will tell you everything." My body blindly responded as she pulled me along. My mind was whirling, and everything seemed to be ringing in my ear. I didn't even notice the absence of gunshots through the halls as I followed her down the empty hall, Simon's pavilion. My body froze as I saw Alice standing on the other side of the window. I was in shock. What was she doing here? She stared back at me, and I could see the excitement and joy on her face, and I knew she was looking for me. I rushed to the window, just wanting to be close to her. "Alice, you need to leave," I yelled, but she just looked confused. She couldn't hear me. Her head turned directions, looking at something down the hall, and my stomach twisted into knots. The siren was still going off, and the mutant rogues were sure to appear soon. "Simon, we need to go too, or we won't get Olivia and William out of here," Alpha Alex exclaimed, grabbing his son and hitching his arm across his shoulders. All right, I said in irritation, turning around. "Wait, where is Olivia?" The girl was only awake for a few minutes, and she was already missing. GD, I wanted to just leave her here to rot. Let's go. I nodded, starting towards one of the two doors.
Hello, Simon. I heard a cold voice say, and I turned around to see the leader of the lab standing in front of me.
You must be Victoria, I replied calmly, gesturing behind my back for the rest to keep moving. Sorry to ruin your plans today.
Victoria's eyes suddenly moved to the window, and she smiled. Oh, you didn't ruin them? They are working out perfectly as planned? She noted. I turned to see what she was looking at and felt my stomach drop. Alice was standing on the other side of the window, backing away from a pack of mutated rogues. I noticed that Joan was standing next to her as well, and I was surprised at the fear I had for her too. I had really grown to respect her.
Day to help them.
As if she had read my mind, a portal appeared and Sophia stepped out, throwing a cloud of smoke toward Victoria and her dysfunctional entourage. I quickly darted for the door, with Sophia close on my heel. We had planned this escape plan, and it was working perfectly, except for the part that now I had to find a way to get to Alice. I burst through the door to find Alpha, Alex, and William still standing on the other side. Just as I opened my mouth, Olivia stumbled back into the hall, tugging along a very large man that somewhat resembled the Alpha King. There was no time for questions. Go, go, go. I gestured to them all, pushing them forward. Keep going until you reach the back door and don't stop. The four wolves took off, but Sophia held back. What are you doing, Simon? She truly looked confused. We have to get out of here, and we have to do it now. Alan is still covering for us outside, but he can't last forever on his own. But Alice is back there. I gestured. I have to get to her. I turned to rush back, but it was too late, thanks to Olivia's little reappearance distracting me. I missed my window to get back inside. I bashed my arm against the door violently, cursing loudly at every impact. I knew it was no use, but I had to keep trying. I needed to save them. Alice was all that was on my mind, blocking out any pain I was feeling in my shoulder from slamming it with brute force into the steel doors. Simon Sophia urged, we have to go. No, I stated, ramming myself into the door once again. I'm not leaving her behind. We have no time, she stated. Her tone was soft yet commanding. However, it only made me angrier. I stopped and stared at her, making my eyes stern and focused. I said no. After a moment, I broke my gaze and tried again and again. I could hear Sophia sigh, and then she began muttering something under her breath. Then she spoke. Simon? I felt my body seize up and stop at her command. She had used magic on me. I couldn't believe she had the gall. Unwillingly, I stopped moving and turned to face her. Despite having no control over my movements, I had control over my eyes, and they bore into her. Take this spell off me, I stated curtly and coolly. I was pissed, but I knew lashing out at Sophia would do more harm than good right now. You know, I can't do that, Simon. This is for your own safety. I know you care for Alice, but we cannot save her if we can't save ourselves. I didn't agree with her tactics, but I had to admit she was right. No matter how much I wanted to save Alice, there was no way I could. If I was dead, I needed to stay alive for Alice. Finally, I nodded, and Sophia, confident in my approval, waved her hands, lifting the spell. I felt my body slump forward as I regained control. Just as I was about to step forward, a gunshot echoed through the halls, making me hesitate. I looked to Sophia, who shook her head. Alice had Joan with her, and I knew as long as she did, she'd be okay. It took everything in me, but I followed Sophia, who led me to where the rest of the group was. We made it to the back door with no issues and slipped outside. Alan was standing there, ready for us, and he loaded all of the patients into the vehicle. Luckily, we had switched to a pickup after the Alice incident, so everyone simply jumped in the back.
Everyone except me. I stood there as the pickup revived, watching the door we had just exited, waiting, praying that she'd show. But before I could even form another thought, I felt myself get drowsy. And without any warning, I fell to the ground and plunged quickly into darkness.
Chapter 36, Monster with a Simon S. Pulver.
I jerked upright and noticed that I was in my own room and my own bed. Jumping out of bed, I swore out loud. Then I stormed into the main room where I saw Sophia and Alan talking.
Damn it, Sophia, I yelled. What the fuck did you do that for? What about Alice? I have to go back and rescue her. Alan stood up and blocked the door as I moved toward it, causing my rage to spike even higher. Get out of my way, I practically growled at him. Just calm down and think first, Simon, Sophia said, snapping my anger back at her. I stomped over to her place on the couch.
Think about what?
Yeah, I asked incredulously that we just left her there after she purposely came in search of us.
I felt my heart pang while I was happy that Alice had wanted to find me and had come back for me. The fact that she had put herself at risk and was now trapped as a result was painful. We have to go rescue her now, I stated forcefully, trying to keep my voice from cracking.
Sophia looked at me in surprise for a moment while she realized that I liked Alice. I don't think that she guessed to what extent, that or she was just still unaccustomed to me showing this much emotion.
Alan still stood silent by the door, ready for anything.
Simon, Sophia scolded me, quit undermining Alice's abilities. She does not need you to rescue her at every turn.
Alice is very smart, and if there is anyone that can carry out her mother's plan to destroy the lab, it's Sardher. You said yourself that Alice is your best student. Let her prove it.
I stood there and processed Sophia's words. She was right. It was still hard to accept. I slouched down on the couch next to her, feeling more defeated than ever. Sophia laid a hand on my back as I dropped my head into my hands.
They will not hurt her, Simon, she said confidently. You told me yourself that she is the key to their success and their demise. It was true. Based on what I had from the hard drive, I realized that Alice's blood was the answer. Her blood was the cure for the madness and illness that their mutations caused. But her mother had also made her blood the tool used to destroy the lab.
Did you leave the plans in the lab computer? Sophia asked, trying to distract me.
Yeah. Perfect. Then, with those in the system, the lab is already compromised. It shouldn't be hard for Alice to figure it out from there, especially with how much training she has been doing.
Could we at least set a time limit? I asked her suddenly, like if we haven't heard from her in 3 days, then I am allowed to go in after her.
Sophia hesitated. I'm not trying to hold you back from rescuing her. I am just trying to make sure you think about your options.
I couldn't just sit here anymore.
I stood up and walked to the door. Alan slid in front of me again.
I know it's hard, Simon, but Sophia has a point.
Alan looked worried. I don't like leaving her there any more than you, but we have to think clearly about this. They won't hurt Alice.
I sighed. I hear you both, and I am processing it. Can I please just go for a walk to clear my head? I won't leave the palace ground.
Alan looked to Sophia, who nodded with her approval. He stood aside.
I walked out of the door and took off at a run, trying to work out the pent-up emotion and anger. I couldn't be angry at Alice because I would have done the same thing if I were in her shoes. However, the fact that she put herself in danger because of me hurt immensely. I was supposed to be making her life safer, not more dangerous. Eventually, I ended up back in the car that I had locked Alice up in. I kicked myself when I realized I should have locked her in there for longer. If she was still in there, then she would still be with me. I opened the car door and bent inside, grabbing my phone and wallet that she had left behind. Then I climbed into the back seat and laid down, hoping that I would be able to smell her still on the material.
I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath right at the end. I caught the faintest hint of her soft scent and smiled, despite the circumstances.
To distract myself further, I examined my wallet and phone. It looked like Alice had found the note that I had left for her. It must have been the reason she came looking for me. A pang shot through my heart at the thought. My phone was next. At first glance, I didn't notice anything, but then I was glad when I kept digging. Even though it didn't say I had new text messages on the main screen, I could see the little number bubble above the text app and quickly clicked on it. Sure enough, a grin spread across my face as I saw that I had 2 new messages from Alice. First, there was a selfie of her sitting in the back seat of the car, flipping me off, and I couldn't help but laugh. Even with the vulgar sassiness, I couldn't help but think how beautiful she looked without hesitation. I clicked on the photo and added it to my gallery. The second was hours after the first, and it was much more simple, yet it made my heart beat even faster. Just as she had asked at Sophia's base the other day, it was upfront and blunt. Simon, do you like me? Once more, I sent a message in reply. I doubted she'd even get it. But I had to answer. I stared at the screen, praying for a reply, but all I received in return was the unmarked red symbol and the shattered realization that maybe it was already too late. Alice's pop. I blurrily realized that Victoria had led me into a room that wasn't quite so white and had a large desk in the middle of it. She set me down in the chair across from her. It almost felt as if I was moving in a fog, thick, slow, and low visibility. Nothing that I had heard or seen made sense. Simon set me up for this all of the times. He saved me from the rogues. It was so he could bring me in himself. I still couldn't get past the shock for the first time. I felt truly and utterly defeated. Alice, Victoria prodded, and I realized that she had said something to me that I had missed. I'm sorry, what I asked, focusing in on her. I was just asking if I could get you anything. Victoria asked with a soft smile. No, I am good. And despite telling me the truth about Simon, she gave me weird vibes, like she was trying too hard to be nice. Okay, well, I am glad that you are finally here. Alice, her creepy smile spread on her face again. I have been waiting a long time for this. I asked. I need you, she stated, simply making me believe her. You are special. Yeah, surprised. I had never been told I was special before. Yes, you, Victoria nodded. Your value is immeasurable because of you. We will be able to breed various supernatural biological weapons. What on earth are you talking about? She looked at me confused. Has nobody told you your history? Did your mother never tell you anything? My mother died, but the mention of her spurred another person into my mind. Joan. Where is Joan? Don't worry, Victoria soothed. She was taken to another room. You will be able to join her later. But first, I want to finish our conversation. I took a breath. There was something off about her. I wasn't sure I believed her, but if I freaked out now, then I wouldn't find out the information that I needed to know. I had to act my way through this. Do you not understand what this place is at all then? She asked further. I shook my head, afraid my voice would give away my true emotion. Welcome home, she stated simply. I looked at her in even more confusion. Welcome home. What does that mean? This place is your home. You were conceived here. You were meant for bigger and better things, to create a superior race. And what if that's not what I want to do? I couldn't help but ask. And wait, what do you mean by conceived here? The Alpha King is my father. Oh, you poor girl, Victoria chuckled. Her tone was almost mocking. Don't be like your mother and give up a great future for love. She could have been amazing, just like you, but instead, she fell in love with one of her experiments and got pregnant. The Alpha King is not your father. A mutated wolf. What?
I stared at her in disbelief. Why would the Alpha King have said that I was his if I wasn't?
And who was the mutated wolf that was my father? Was he human? Was he a wolf? Was that why I was different now that I thought about it? It made a lot more sense with my mutations, but I still couldn't believe it. Before the shock of that information, plus Simon's reveal could even have a chance to wear off. Victoria continued to drop bomb. Your mother was always weak. She had a gentle and peaceful character and was manipulated by many. It took a lot to convince her to be a part of this project, and then just when it started to succeed, she turned on us. Victoria's true colors were starting to show as her jealousy bled into her story. She sighed and waved her hand fleetingly. I was always much stronger. I knew that shifters were simple beasts with no feelings, and the ones that sacrificed their lives for the furtherment of the experiment would hold the highest honor as they bettered mankind. I believe that we are similar in that aspect. Victoria's eyes were piercing me as she got worked up. I heard that you had planned to live with humans because you can't stand shifters and think they're all awful beings. She sounds strong like me. I bit my tongue and held my spiteful words back. I still needed more information. So I put all of these life-altering facts in a box for me to decompress later before turning my attention back to this spiteful old lady. So what do you want from me? I asked steadily. I had to get her to believe I was on her side. It was the only way I could get out of this. And just like James and Olivia, she seemed easy to manipulate. I want you to be my partner and to help me create a super race so that we can take out shifters once and for all. I had to give her credit. She didn't lie about it or beat around the bush. I took in a deep breath before speaking, trying my hardest to sound sincere. Sign me up. I watched as her eyes widened and her smile grew. Goddess, it was hideous. I smiled back, but in the depths of my mind, I had already begun my plan to shut this place down for good. It was my second day in the lab. I rubbed my stiff arm. Victoria took even more blood out of me for some experimentation, and the spot where the needle had been was still tight. Even in the short amount of time I had spent with her, I had begun to realize just how much she must have hated my mom. Everything she said to me almost seemed to be a dig at her. Victoria was simply not a likable person.
I wanted to know more about Simon as well, but I was afraid to hear the answers.
I thought I knew Simon, and something told me what Victoria had shown me wasn't the entire truth. But then again, what if I was wrong? What if he had broken down my guard so much he was able to use it against me? He hadn't even come back for me. Not that I needed him to. It just would have been nice to know that he wanted me and that he was everything I believed him to be. Victoria hadn't mentioned him either, though, so I remembered to also consider that she was bluffing. As I tried to massage my withdrawal spot, Victoria came back up to me. How would you like to prove yourself and help me with an experiment today? She asked. Looking delighted. Sounds fun. I faked an excited tone followed by a smile. My acting seemed to be working on her. Perfect, follow me. I let her lead me down a couple hallways and then walked into a room as she held the door open for me. My eyes fell onto the bed in the middle of the room and I stopped moving. Alice Joan cried out from the bed, pulling at the restraints that held her down. I attempted to rush to her side, but the rogue that followed Victoria everywhere grabbed my hand and held me back. Now, Alice,
Victoria ticked with her tongue. I don't need your help quite yet. Just wait your turn. Victoria grabbed a syringe from her inner pocket and took the needle shield off of it.
I struggled harder to get to Joan as I watched her raise it to the light and tap on it a couple of times to work out the bubbles. I didn't know what I would do when I got to her or how I could save her, but I just had to get to Joan. My feet were now involved in my fight against the rogue as I tried to reach her, but it was too late. I watched as Victoria took the needle and shoved it into the side of Joan's neck.
No, I screamed out.
What was that?
You will see, Victoria said with a smile. She was crazy.
Joan began to thrash on the bed, and my eyes stung as I watched the lady that was my second mother scream out in pain. I stepped forward as she began to transform. Claws sprouted, then the teeth, then fur. Joan, I sobbed as she began to calm down.
Her head turned to me, but there was no recognition in her eyes.
Joan, I yelled again, knowing it wouldn't help. She growled, not Joan, not Joan, not Joan, anyone but Joan.
What did you do? I screamed as I rounded on Victoria.
Just trying to give you a little motivation, Victoria stated, shrugging indifferently. Your mother always responded well to emotional motivation, so I thought I would give it a shot with you as well.
Motivation for what?
Yeah, I couldn't stop screaming as I watched Joan arc back in pain again. Victoria sighed. Keep up, Alice, she scolded. We are still trying to develop the strongest shifter weapon after all.
So what does Joan have to do with that?
You can personally transform Joan into a true shifter and end her suffering if you choose, Victoria announced. Your blood is the solution, and the needle I just filled can help with that. She pulled a second syringe full of my blood out of her pocket. If you give it to her, then the madness will stop. Victoria looked contemplative. In theory, anyway, she smiled again. So if you want to stop this, please decide. My jaw was eternally on the floor around her. I had grown up around some nasty people, but Victoria made them look like a walk in the park. The mutated rogue let go of my arm, but I still stood there staring at Joan's body. How had it come down to the... Joan's body began to thrash, and I moved toward Victoria, taking the needle from her hand. She beamed at my choice. Before I could stop myself, I slowly walked toward Joan, who hadn't stopped flailing about on the table. I uncapped the syringe and took in a deep breath. I was doing this for Joan. I couldn't let her go out this way. I had to help her. And if my blood was the answer, so be it. I closed my eyes and shoved the needle into her neck quickly. Everything seemed to go silent, and Joan stopped moving. I opened my eyes and pulled the needle out slowly. My eyes widened. What had I done? Joan wasn't the monster. I was. Chapter 37. I'm sorry. Alice's puff. I looked at Joan in horror. What did you make me do? I asked. My voice and hands trembled, and the needle fell to the ground with a crash. What do you mean? Victoria asked, that smile still planted on her face. I wanted to smack it off. I did you both a favor. She couldn't live in your world as a human anymore with your evolution to your true wolf. And she didn't want to be left behind, so she came to me and asked me to change her. She knew that with your help, we could both help her just like we could help all of the other experiments. My eyes took in Victoria and her mannerisms. She seemed collected and natural, like she was telling me the truth. And she wasn't displaying the common tells that I had learned over the years, such as avoiding eye contact or explaining. I wasn't sure what to think. But I wanted to believe her, especially as I stood there and looked at Joan's body lying limp in the bed. At this point, what mattered most was helping Joan. It didn't really matter if Victoria was telling me the truth or not. I couldn't attack her and risk losing Joan in the process. So I decided to temporarily put my faith in Victoria and to believe that she really did this to help us. I inhaled to calm myself, and the shaking in my hands slowed. I cleared my throat before speaking. Okay, I started slowly. I believe you. What can I do to help? I asked softly, my eyes now focused solely on Joan.
Come with me and we can examine the formulas in the bio room. Victoria looked victorious, like she had hooked me, and deep down, I knew she had.
Simon had already possibly turned on me. I couldn't lose Joan too.
I simply nodded, and Victoria began to guide me out of the room. She wormed her way through the halls and deeper into the laboratory. No matter how much I focused when we walked, I could not make sense of the confusing building. No wonder nobody escaped.
Victoria scanned an eyed badge on a huge steel door, and it swung open with a beep. Inside was a room that reminded me of Sophia's base. There were ingredients stacked around and tables with utensils.
Only this room was a lot more scientifically and technologically advanced. There were computers placed on every table, and there were multiple cameras set up close where they could easily record any events taking place inside.
This must be where my mom had worked.
And I could see that once the giant door shut behind me, it was easy to forget about what was happening outside of it. It was sucking me in, enticing me with the knowledge it could hold.
Let me show you where our notes are, and maybe that will help you realize the great things we are doing here and how you are so important. Victoria noted as she walked over to one of the side shelves. She opened a door on a cabinet above the table, and I was surprised to see the number of binders lined inside.
I stepped closer and realized they were organized by dates. I also noticed that the binders were different colored.
What do the colors mean? I asked, finally speaking.
They represent the different projects. Victoria answered and walked over to one of the other tables to grab a chair.
I reached out and took a blue one, seeing that it said Creator Projects on the side.
I recognized the names from my mother's own notes. This blew my mind. I had assumed after receiving the hard drive that my mother had taken all of the notes with her, but this must be the reason that they were able to continue their work. My mother must have just had copies on her hard drive.
I flipped open the binder and found printed pages with notes on the side. It was obvious that this set of notes was newer and must be Victoria's herself. I didn't see anyone else in the room at the moment, but figured there must be other scientists as well in the building.
I'll leave you to it then while I work on something else, Victoria stated and began to walk to a different table. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
I watched as she walked only a few feet away and then turned my attention back to the binders in front of me.
She had left the cabinet door open, so I examined the other colors as well. I was trying to see if any of the other project names stuck out to me.
There was one color that didn't seem to have very many binders, which made me curious.
So I grabbed one of the two black binders and pulled it down as well, sitting in the chair Victoria had provided.
I opened it and saw Control Projects written on the front page. There was a red stamp on the paper as well that reached close to... "What is this?" I asked, and Victoria rolled over to me in a chair of her own. That was the Control Projects. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at that obvious piece of information. It was one of the experiments that I was working on while we were trying to create shifters out of humans. We also decided to test and see if there were ways to control the true shifters as well.
My skin seemed to prick at the idea. As someone who loved her independence, I couldn't imagine the idea that someone could control me.
What does that closing tag mean? I continued.
The experiment was ultimately unsuccessful, so we closed the project. Victoria slowly replied.
It was as if she didn't want to admit that she wasn't as smart or perfect as she appeared. The only semi-successful case was an alpha that killed his wife many years ago. But then he turned rogue, and we were no longer able to control him.
Once he left, we abandoned the plan and focused back on the creator projects with your genes. We had hope for the project working and surviving. I threw the black binder to the side, though. I was relieved to hear that a particular project had failed. The notes were of no use to me. That won't help me with Joan. I sighed and turned back to the creator project notes. Joan already has your genes inside of you, so she will be fine. Victoria placed a hand on my back as if to comfort me. We just need to evaluate her and make sure she handles the transition well. And we need to experiment with your genes and see if they could be used to create another unique breed of shifters. Joan is the first one with my genes inside her, though, so we don't know for sure how she will react. I paused. She is technically the first experiment. Victoria was silent, which unnerved me. Isn't she? I asked, actually unsure. A loud banging interrupted the room, stopping Victoria before she could answer me. She looked startled, obviously not expecting the knock either, and jumped up to open the door. I wondered if her badge was the only one that had access to this room. Standing up, I walked over to the door as well, curious about what the knocking was for. It sounded pretty frantic. Another knock started just as Victoria was opening the door, cutting it off midway. "Dr. Victoria, you have to come soon. Something is wrong," a frantic female voice stated. I stepped to the side so I could see her. She was simply standing there, shaking in a white lab coat. "What is it? What is going on?" Victoria asked quickly, though her voice sounded calmer than I expected. "It's the experiment. Her stats are gonna haywire. The poor girl had to only be about the same age as me and didn't know what she was doing." "Wait, the experiment?" I pushed past Victoria before she could respond and talk to the girl myself. "Take me there now." The girl seemed to notice my own frantic energy and took off in a run without question. I followed right on her heels. There were footsteps behind me as well, telling me that Victoria was coming too. In a matter of seconds, we were bursting through into Joan's room once more. And she indeed did not look well. I rushed to the bed to see what was wrong. Her face was covered in sweat, and her skin was flushed, bright red. I grabbed a cloth that was on the table next to the bed and attempted to wipe the sweat from her brow. As soon as I touched her, Joan's eyes flew open and stared through me, as if she didn't actually see me standing there. And then before I knew it, she ripped the restraint off of the metal frame and pushed me away. I stumbled to the ground and looked up in time to see Joan's body bulge as it shifted and changed. Within seconds, a huge wolf stood on top of the bed where Joan's body had just been lying. There were shouts and multiple white coats rushed forward with needles intending to sedate her. However, Joan seemed to be disoriented and fell off the bed. Being in the wolf body was new for her, just as it had been new to me, and she didn't seem to understand how to move it. I shrank back against the wall, trying to avoid her as she crashed around the room, destroying everything in sight. She let out a whimper as she ran into some objects and stepped on broken glass. Some of the mutated rogues entered the room and jumped on her, trying to hold her down, but she threw them all off. One particularly large rogue stepped up and caught Joan's leg in its mouth, biting down hard. Joan howled in pain, and that caused me to spring into action. I jumped up and ripped the rogue off of Joan and then took my place to stand in front of her as she lay on the ground. A growl ripped out of my chest as I stared down at the rogues in front of me, and they all seemed to back down. Joan whimpered behind me, and I glanced back to see that she was still lying. Still, I was glad that she was finally calm, but I was worried that there might be something seriously wrong with her. "You can go," I heard Victoria say to the wolves. "We can handle it from here."
They began to leave the room, and I spun around and crouched next to Joan. Her body began to tremble under my hand as I stroked her fur, and I watched as it slowly shriveled and shifted back into her human body. Her body was battered and bleeding slightly. The leg closest to me was dark red with blood. She looked up at me, and for the first time since the incidents had begun, she looked at me in recognition. Tears sprang up in her eyes, startling me.
I'm sorry, Alice, Joan said quietly. This is all my fault. What are you talking about, Joan? My voice cracked. I never told you about my past. Her breathing was almost ragged. She glanced behind me at Victoria and talked quieter and quicker.
When I was a young soldier, I was the first in a group of people selected to participate in an army strengthening plan called the Creator Projects, which is how I met your mother. My eyes grew. You were a part of the Creator Project. I was shocked. Don't ask any questions, just listen, because I have to speak fast. Joan glanced behind me again. After realizing that the Creator Project was experimenting on humans to turn them into shifters, I killed the chief that dragged me here and escaped. I should have exposed the project then. If I had dared to expose it, then perhaps your real father would not have been the next victim. Joan did look remorseful, and I was focusing on her face, trying to catch every word that she said. I'm sorry, Alice, you are not an experiment. You are my most precious daughter. There were tears in her eyes as she pulled me into a hug. Then she whispered in her ear, someone will come to your rescue. Do not believe anything that Victoria says. She is a snake and is using me to use you. Don't trust Victoria, so I was right. Was she lying about everything, including Simon? My heart lifted a fraction at the possibility. But I won't let her use you. Joan's voice was stronger now as she pulled away from me. Remember, Alice, life is beautiful, precious, and worthy of awe. I was so focused on her face that I hadn't noticed Joan pick up a piece of glass that was lying scattered around us. She squeezed her fist and brought the glass up fast, jamming it in her own throat. Now I screamed in agony, lurching forward, but it was too late. I caught her body as it slid to the floor and tried to put pressure on the wound in her neck. But the blood surrounded my hand in a matter of seconds. There was no stopping it. Victoria yelled something around me, but I was too zoned into Joan to understand the words. Joan stared up into my eyes, smiling as she brought one of her hands to my cheek and cupped it. I'm sorry, she choked out around the blood. And then I watched as the light faded out of her eyes. Water splashed on her still face as tears from my own eyes dripped onto her. Victoria's voice seeped in as she continued to yell, and I felt something snap inside of me. My eyes burned as I turned to look at Victoria, who was still standing about 10 feet away. My skin burned as the rage inside me built. She would pay for this, and I'd make sure of it. Chapter 30, Abject Alpha. My Alice's pub. I lunged for Victoria, intent on killing her. Before I could reach her, the rogues emerged from behind her and grabbed me by my arms, pinning them back. I growled again, feeling my fangs grow out. I pulled and yanked, but I couldn't pull myself out of the strong grip of the rogues around me. I was really hoping it wouldn't come to this and that you could work with me, Victoria stated angrily, but it looks like you are just as dumb as your mother. I snapped my teeth at Victoria, and she sighed. Then she gestured to the rogue. Lock her up with him. She looked back at me. Maybe we'll still get some use out of you yet. The rogues dragged me off of my feet and out of the room. I didn't stop kicking and fighting the entire way to the new location. One of the humans in a lab coat led the way, opening another large steel door that was similar to the other one. This one had another badge lock that the human had to get us through. On the other side of the door was another long hall lined with large cells on either side. The rogues continued to drag me through until they got to the cell that had a large man in it. They unlocked it and quickly threw me in, not giving the other prisoner a chance to escape. Though it didn't really look like he would be able to, even if he tried. He didn't seem to even notice the commotion around us and was sitting in the corner, seemingly talking to himself. Once the cell door was locked, all of the rogues and humans took back off out of the room without a word or even a second glance. I crawled onto my knees and looked in front of me. The cell they had thrown me in had a small cot and a small toilet in the corner. That was it. It was surrounded on all sides by thick metal bars. They must have realized that a true shifter could probably break through a wall, so bars were placed in front of the back brick wall as well. There were cells on either side of the one that I was in, and while one seemed to be empty, the other seemed to have a small bundle of rags in it that must be a person. I sat back down, not even having the energy to stand, and felt my mutations shrink back to my human features. I felt nauseous and my cheeks were still wet from my tears, but I wasn't sure when I quit crying. I wrapped my arms around my knees and pulled them in closer, trying to keep them from falling apart. The man in the corner moved, which attracted my attention. He had now turned in my direction, and I realized that he kind of looked familiar to me. But he was an older man, and I didn't remember ever meeting him. His face was covered in facial hair that wasn't maintained, and his eyes were just as wild as his hair. And they were looking right at me. "Girl, pretty girl," he said quickly, but I didn't think he was talking to me. We've never had a guest before, or a girl. "Why here?" I stared at him, unsure of what to say. His tone was unnerving, and it was clear that he had lost his mind. Based on his age, he could have been held prisoner here for a long time, eventually driving him mad. "I'm Alice," I said slowly, hoping that if I talked, he would feel more comfortable. "Alice, pretty name, pretty voice, pretty girl." The older gentleman was still not talking to me, but he began to move closer, making me uneasy. "Who are you?" I asked, backing up as far as possible. Who am I? Who am I? Pretty girl doesn't know me, doesn't know. The man smiled, but it didn't make me feel any better. Alpha King's uncle, that's me, sitting in a cage, no longer free. My eyes widened as realization hit me. That's why he looked so familiar. This was the Alpha King's uncle, the one that was taken 20 years ago. He didn't look that old, but wolves did tend to age a little slower, especially Alpha Wolf. I shivered as he stepped closer and reached out to rub a finger from my shoulder down to my arm. I tried to back up further, but the bars were already pressing into my back, so I shimmied to the side, trying to evade him that way. But he followed closely until I was trapped in the corner. "Please stop." I made my voice as firm as possible. No, pretty girl." He tugged on my shirt, and I felt genuine fear spring into my stomach. "I want pretty girl." He reached in and buried his head against my shoulder, nipping at my neck, and I gasped. But unlike the times with Simon, this gasp was from fear, not excitement, without a second thought. I kneed him in the groan, and he grunted as he doubled over. His arms were still pinned on either side of me, though, not allowing me to escape. "Just wear him out," a small voice said from behind me. It came from the cell next to us. "He's heavily sedated around the clock with aphrodisiacs, so if you hold him off for long enough, he will pass out. It doesn't take much." I nodded, understanding my job. The problem was that I was already starting to feel pretty physically exhausted. His hand made its way up my leg, and I tried to fight the tiredness that was taking over. What was happening to me? Suddenly, his hand got closer to my inner thigh, jolting my still alert senses into action. I yanked on his arm hard and broke the grasp that he had pinned me in with. I was tiring faster than usual. Was it possible she had given me the same sedative at some point through my food? Regardless of the power struggle, I fought against him, getting in a few good hits, using the training Simon gave to me. The prisoner gave me a few good punches in retaliation and swiped at my stomach. His claws tore through my flesh, and I let out a cry in pain. The wound seared as the cool air connected with its heat. That I couldn't focus on that. Now, I could tell he was wearing down, and I had to keep going to make him tire quicker. I felt my body begin to heat up, and a tingling sensation shot through me as he pinned me back into place. I thrashed my legs to get free once more. What the hell was going on? There was no way I was getting turned on by this. My body felt so strange, foreign, yet at the same time, I was repulsed. I let back my own growing desires. It was like I wanted to mate. I was humiliated that things had gotten to this point. Was I really in heat right now? Whatever she gave me was making me sleepy. And if I was sleepy, then he could do what he wanted with me. She could produce more just like me. I was nothing but an experiment to Victoria Shana breeder. I was getting exhausted, but I had to get loose. He was tiring too soon. I found myself thinking of Simon. It was like Mike's face morphed into his, and I slowly found myself wanting to let him have me. Oh, Simon! I could feel it, feel him. If only I had a taste. Go, Simon pressed his knee into my leg to hold me down. This wasn't Simon. Simon wouldn't hurt me. I shook my head, and Mike's face came back into view. My fight or flight won over my hormones, and I realized how badly I needed to get out. When I saw my moment, I pushed back, clamping my mouth around his wrist. Mike howled in pain, and he scooted off me. I took my chance to sit up just when I thought he'd given up, his eyes focused back on mine, but there was no desire in them. It was pure rage. He raced for me, and I dodged him, swiping at him with my feet. Mike grabbed a hold of my leg. Stay still, pretty girl. It'll only take a moment, as Master says, a moment. Fuck that. I kicked at his face and hit him directly in the jaw. Mike let go, and I lunged for a nearby weapon. Anything. My eyes landed on a rusty nail that lay on the ground. What it was from, I had no clue, but it would do. I grabbed it just as I felt myself being pulled back by my leg again. Be a good pretty girl. He growled. That was it. I was done. I screamed out a battle cry and drove the nail directly into his arm. Mike cried out in pain and let me go, retreating instantly back into his corner of the cell. As soon as I was free, I lunged forward and hit him over the head, knocking him out instantly. I fell back onto my back, staring at the ceiling while breathing heavily. I wasn't sure who I could trust anymore, but I did know I was thirsty as hell and tired. As if reading my mind, a glass of water and a small loaf of bread slowly slid in front of me. I looked over to see a tiny human girl pushing them toward me. Based on her eyes, I knew that she was the one that had told me about Mike's condition. Thank you. I choked out between breaths as I grabbed the water and bread. I really had no option now. I needed to gather my strength if I was going to be stuck in a cell with the lunatic for much longer and remain awake. You're welcome, she said with a soft smile. She tucked her hair back, and I started as I noticed that she had wolf ears, despite her human appearance. At this, my eyes widened. You're a wolf? I asked in surprise. She shook her head. No, not really. They just gave me the genes of one. I looked at her more closely and realized that she must be one of the experiments. Her face was pale and her lips were blue, and she was very, very young. Based on what I could see, she wouldn't live long.
What in their right mind had possessed them to add a young girl to the experiment project? Are you human? She asked as I stayed silent. Were you captured? Also captured. So I was right in learning that none, or at least most of these humans were here willingly. That made me feel awful. It also made me unsure of how to answer this young girl's question. The only reason she was here, that any of them were still here being experimented on, was because of me. If it wasn't for me, Victoria would have given up a long time ago. Unlike you, I finally said, hoping she would take that answer. Looking at her now made me wonder why she was down here in the prison instead of in the room with the other experiments, though. It did look like her body hadn't truly accepted the mutation. Most of the mutated rogues were completely mutated. The only problem was that they went mad just like the wolf in my cell. And once they grew too mad, then they would turn on each other. But this girl didn't seem to have any other mutations besides her ears. And I realized that Victoria had probably just thought she was worthless as a wolf weapon and sent her down here to die. I looked around the cells on the opposite wall and saw more bodies that looked weak, confirming my theory. They were just experiments in Victoria's eyes, not people. Where did they capture you? I couldn't help but ask, feeling sympathetic for the young girl. Like many of the others in here, they caught me living on the street. The girl shrugged as if embarrassed. We are easy to forget about, so I am sure that they had an easy time getting away with it. What a clever girl. So they brought you here to inject you? I asked.
Yeah, she nodded. They gave us each this weird shot, making promises of a better life and better health. But it almost had the opposite effect.
Many of the people became ill and started to have health problems, and then some of them went mad, much like the guy there with you, though. He was already here when I arrived and already crazy. She made a gesture with her arm, and I realized how slim and thin it was. There was a reason that I had thought she looked like a pile of rags. Because the clothes hung off of her so loosely that it was easy to lose her in them. Her head even seemed much too big for her teeny body. How old are you? I asked softly, scared to hear the answer. 10, she said with a small smile. At least I think so. If my calculations are correct, I won't be 11 for another month. I was going to join the soccer team this year too. I practiced hard and I am already better than the boy. My heart cracked for most of my life. I was not a very compassionate person, but looking in the face of this girl, something changed inside of me. I needed to help her, to help them. What is the human world like? I asked, wanting to keep her talking as I thought up ideas. I've never lived in the human world, actually. It's pretty much the same as this place, I would say, she said, and then paused as if she was thinking. As someone that lived on the streets, I saw that there are good and bad people in the human world. Some people only care about themselves, but then you get the few that will go out of their way to help you. And I feel like it is the same here. There are good and bad people, and although we are caught by the bad guys now, I believe that there are good guys that will come to our rescue. And the little girl's positive outlook was contagious, and I couldn't help but wish for the same thing. I hadn't allowed myself to think about Joan or her final words, but I was still holding on to them. Maybe Simon really was who I thought he was, and maybe he was working on finding a way to save me right at this moment. You might just be right about that. I told her, trying to encourage her hope. The little girl smiled, and it looked genuine. You are a good person too. I can tell. She reached through and squeezed my hand. I looked down at the hand, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to tell her that she was wrong about that. I was not a good person. But at that moment, I was glad that I wasn't a good person because that's what it would take to get us out of there. I was gonna get us out of there and kill Victoria. Chapter 39, Breeding Alice's Puff. My stomach burned as I took an especially deep breath in. I looked down to see a deep gash wound on my stomach from where Mike had slashed at me. It took a while for me to notice it. The adrenaline had stopped me from feeling it any longer. But once the little girl retreated into her cell and I was alone again, it came at me full force. I lifted my head slightly and moved my hands, but all I could see was blood. Lifting my head required me to use my abs too much, so I dropped my head back down and tried to apply more pressure to the wound. I was getting messy. The claws had torn cleanly through my clothing and my skin. I had managed to hold on long enough to subdue the madman. But now I could feel my vision fading as I lay on the floor bleeding out. In some ways, it brought me peace. If I were to go now, then nobody else would be used in the future. And I could join Joan and my mother in the afterlife. But I wouldn't be able to save the people affected. Now I wouldn't be able to kill Victoria to get my revenge, and I wouldn't be able to see Simon again. Simon! I fought to keep my vision from going blurry and to stay conscious. There was no way that Victoria would let me die down here. I needed to get someone's attention. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe fate was real, because just as I thought that I heard a voice come over the security monitor that occupied the corner of the cell. Alice. It was Simon's voice. Was I hallucinating? Was I already dead? I closed my eyes in sadness. Simon's voice came through again. Alice, wake up. Stay with me. My eyes shot open. I wasn't crazy. I would know Simon's voice anywhere. And that was Simon's voice. I looked over to the camera that I saw and stared right into it. There you go. There's my good girl, Simon said softly, and I couldn't help but smile. Simon? I croaked out. The young girl, Tibby, was helping me get water, but it wasn't near enough for what I needed, especially with fighting off the pervert prisoner.
Yes, it's me. I'm here.
I nearly wanted to cry again. How are you talking to me? How are you here? I asked quickly. When we broke into the lab to rescue William and Olivia, I left a virus in the lab computer that would allow me control of the system. Simon said quickly. But I don't have time to explain all of that. Victoria can see you through this monitor as well, and I am sure she is already on her way to get to you. I nodded, not wanting to use my voice. Listen carefully. You need to hold on. Your blood is what is needed to destroy the research. Victoria will fix the monitor soon, and I won't be able to talk to you, but just know that I am here. My eyes began to close again. Alice, wake up. I need you to be strong and hold on for me. Okay. Even though I was trying to keep my eyes open and trying to stay aware, I was starting to get lightheaded. The original adrenaline of hearing Simon's voice was starting to wear off. I opened my mouth to force myself to speak, to stay awake. Will you come to rescue me? I asked, my voice shaking as I talked. There was a pause, and I closed my eyes again, wondering if I had truly hallucinated the whole thing, as I had originally expected. But then he answered me, reminding me it was reality. Wait for me, Alice. I'm coming for you. Simon's voice cut off as the monitor went silent. I heard someone clear their throat, and I turned my head slightly to see Victoria standing at the entrance to my cell. The hatred that boiled up inside of me brought me even clearer, and I glared at her. I was so enraged that I was surprised that it didn't boil out of the wound in my stomach. At that point, Victoria seemed to notice the injury and the blood. Shit, she grabbed a radio that was clipped onto her pants. Bring a bed to the prison fast. Alice is injured. With how out of it I wasn't sure how long it actually took to get there, but It seemed like forever.
My gaze never left Victoria as I stared at her in hatred, even as they came into the cell and lifted me onto a hospital bed to be wheeled away. I wished I could take the opportunity to attack them all and make my escape as soon as we were in the hall, but my injury was severe enough that I knew it wasn't even an option. I would pass out before I ever reached the outside. They wheeled me through into a room that looked much like the one that William and Olivia were in, and Victoria walked over to the cabinets that lined one wall. Once she had grabbed enough medical supplies, she walked closer to me. I went to claw at her, not caring whether I lived or died, but I couldn't bring my arms higher than 6 inches off of the bed. Somewhere along the way here, someone had put me in restraints. Smart. "What happened, Alice?" Victoria scolded me as if I was a misbehaving child. "How did you get that?"
Maybe it was the psycho roomy prisoner that you locked me in with. Ever think of that? Despite my dry, sore throat, I couldn't help but croak out smart as comments to this woman. "If you did what you should have done, this wouldn't have happened," Victoria ticked with her tongue. I growled. I knew exactly what she wanted from me. "You intended. You raped me to reproduce, didn't you?" She smiled. "Oh, you're a smart one, Alice," she mocked as she cleaned my wound. I winced at the stinging sensation the medicine caused. "You see, once in estrus, usually the desire to mate can't be curbed in any way. But once again, you surprised me. You broke out of it." I snarled at her and scoffed like I'd tell you anything. Victoria shrugged. "Fine then, don't. But I saw it Juan on the monitor when he had you pinned. You felt something. You know the beast inside of you is aching to be free. The only beast here is you." I snapped back. "I am not a tool for reproduction, and neither are the others you have locked down there. You're a vile person. You deserve to die, and I can't wait to be the one to kill you." Victoria laughed, which surprised me. "I wouldn't get too sure of yourself there. Miss Alice, don't forget, your mother ran away from me crying when I was done with her, and..." Victoria cocked her head to the side and looked at me with her cold eyes, and all I had to do was murder your father, the man she loved. Maybe that would work a second time. It sounded like I interrupted something with Simon earlier. Perhaps we should get him back down here. "Don't you dare, goddess. I hated this woman. So I take it that you were lying about Simon all along then, weren't you? He was never working with you." "Of course not," Victoria laughed. "And you should have seen your face. It was like I killed your puppy. You were just as gullible as your mom, which worked well for me in the beginning. Too bad Joan had to come along and ruin it." "Don't talk about her." There was a lump in my throat. I felt my claws and fangs start to slide out, which Victoria noticed as well. Fascinating. It seems like most of the time your mutations are controlled by your emotions. She grabbed a little recorder out of her pocket and repeated herself before going on. Unlike the other counterparts, Alice's emotions seem to control the mutations, whereas with the others, their mutations seem to control their emotions, which is why they go mad. Very interesting. Always a scientist, evil scientist at that, but she did have an analytical mind. She finished placing a large bandage over her handiwork on my stomach and stepped back to admire it. She seemed to be happy with the results and took her gloves off before getting ready to leave the room. "What if I wasn't done talking with you?" I asked. She paused for only a second as she turned back around to look at me. "Why do you think I care?" She turned to one of the humans by the door. "Keep her sedated and let me know when she is well enough to move." And with that, she was gone. I watched as the humans walked over to add some medicine into my IV and tried to resist, but with the restraints that made it pretty impossible. My vision began to blur again, and I felt relief from the pain in my stomach. But I didn't feel relief from the pain in my chest.
I had learned so much about my past in the last few days, and yet I had no time to process it. Now I had learned that Victoria was the one that killed my true father. And it was like I was losing him all over again. And then there was the stuff with Simon. Was he really coming for me? Would he rescue me? I felt embarrassed now for asking for his help, but at the same time, I couldn't wait to see him again. And he was the only one left that I trusted. I just wanted him with me. Simon was my safety blanket because he was so strong that he would keep me safe. Nothing could hurt him, not even Victoria, right? Chapter 40, Unconscious Information. Alice's pup. No, we have to move her into the lab where I can keep an eye on her. I heard Victoria's voice say... Her voice flooded into my subconscious as I awoke. However, I kept my eyes shut. If they thought I was still sleeping, they were more likely to speak freely. How is she? She asked. Did Victoria sound almost fearful? Will her wounds heal? It's hard to tell at this time. Being in heat has really affected her healing abilities. It's consuming a lot of her energy. She is weaker than normal, a deep male voice noted. Victoria huffed. If only she'd mated with Mike like planned, this wouldn't have happened. She'd be strong enough. I tried to keep my body as still as possible. The longer I held out, the more time I was buying Simon. He was coming for me. He had said so himself. Soon enough, I found myself struggling to stay conscious. Sleep was overtaking me again. No, I couldn't let that happen. I needed to stay alert. Every time I felt tired or asleep, something bad happened to me. They did things to me. My mind shifted to thoughts of Simon, how he touched me, held me, cared for me. But despite my best efforts, I fell back into a deep sleep. And before I knew it, there was Simon in front of me, standing by the lake, where we had spent so much of our time training. Simon, I called out and ran to him, jumping into his arms. Simon easily picked me up and twirled me around with a spin. There's my top student, he chuckled, setting me back on the ground, but not releasing me from his arms. Did you miss me? Instead of answering him, I grabbed the neat collar of his suit and pulled him down into me. Our lips met, and I felt the fire bloom inside of me. Simon pulled back in surprise, staring deep into my eyes. I could see the fire burning there as well. Did you miss me? I asked back as seductively as I could, emphasizing the Tamika. Simon followed my suit by responding with actions instead of words. He pushed me back with the arms that were still wrapped around my waist until my back connected with the tree that he had held me up against once before. Then my lips met his with anticipation. Goddess, I love this tree. Our kiss deepened as I felt his tongue slide inside my mouth and explore every corner. His grip tightened on my waist, and I heard myself gasp, causing Simon to release a groan in response. I pressed my hips into him at the same time, feeling the heat grow deeper and deeper. I moved my hands to slide in between his suit jacket and shirt, and understanding what I wanted, Simon instantly slid his jacket off while my fingers rushed and stumbled to undo the buttons within seconds. His shirt was off as well. He stepped back away from me, and while I missed his presence, I enjoyed being able to stare at him standing there in only his pants. We both collectively caught our breath as we watched each other. But my fire was still burning, and I didn't want to wait anymore. I grabbed my pants and slid them down quickly and ripped my shirt over my head. It hadn't been graceful or elegant, but it had done the job. Simon looked like he was going to have a heart attack as he drank in me, standing there in just my bra and undies. And just as I had intended, he stepped back up to me and grabbed my face, kissing me hard and fast. He felt almost as desperate as me. I gasped as he slid his hands down to my thighs and easily lifted them up and around him, pressing me even harder against the tree. I moaned as I felt the bulge press against me through his suit pants and my thin underwear. I heard him moan in response as he pressed even harder against me. His lips moved to my neck and I arched into him, trying to catch my breath again. I felt my underwear grow damp. My hands rubbed against his shoulders and back, loving the feeling of his bare skin. He leaned back and ripped my breath off, discarding it on the ground. There was only a small moment where he admired my chest with his eyes before his lips fell back on mine. I moaned as his hands found my chest and heard him groan in response again. "I want you so bad," he growled into my ear, kissing along my jaw.
Then what are you waiting for?
I teased breathlessly. Simon spent no time hesitating as I heard him unzip his pants and push my underwear to the side. This was it. This was really happening. I was going to finally have sex with Simon. His fingers brushed against me, and I arched against him.
Are you ready for this? His voice sounded like music in my ear. Yes.
But the feeling of satisfaction never came as I felt myself jump back to consciousness. When I awoke again, I heard Victoria muttering to someone again. Damn, it had been a dream. Simon hacked into the lab system and used it to talk with her over the monitor, and I can't take that risk again. If he did it once, he can do it again. She sounded irritated, and I wanted to open my eyes to bask in the sight, but stayed strong. If she is in the lab with me the whole time, then I can make sure it doesn't happen again. My face stayed neutral as I felt the bed begin to move. I had figured that after that incident, Victoria would already be less likely to put me back in the cell.
I was awake again. Schwa. For how long? I wasn't sure shit. What did I miss? I needed to listen to as much as I could.
The bed squealed as it rolled through what I presumed was one of the hallways into another room. I felt disoriented with my eyes closed, but knew that I couldn't risk opening them yet. "Just set her up over there," Victoria said as I heard a door swing open. I had no idea where they were putting me, but hoped it was somewhere with a good view of Victoria. There was nowhere in the room to hide, but I wanted to be able to hear what she was doing at all times. There was a bit more noise as the humans finished setting me up, and then they were gone. I heard the door shut as they all left. However, I kept still and kept my eyes shut as I was positive Victoria was still in the room. Sure enough, it only took another moment before she confirmed it. "Try getting help from Simon now. Alice," she whispered quietly to me. "Did she know I was faking? How could she? You are all alone. And with you sleeping, I can do what I finally need to." So she didn't know I still had the upper hand. I heard some typing and realized Victoria must have got back to work. Needing more information, I risked opening my eyes just a fraction and stared through my lashes to see what was going on. Victoria had placed my bed almost right next to her. I almost quit breathing when I saw her that close and shut my eyes as fast as I could. When her typing continued as normal, I slowly cracked them open again to look. We were in the room that looked like Sophia's base, and Victoria was standing at the main desk with the largest computer. She had placed my bed right beside the desk, and I had to make sure not to move to examine the rest of the room, or she would see me. She was already in the system, which made me sad. I was going to attempt to watch her log into the computer and make a mental note of the password so that I could access it later. Patience would have to be my friend. Now, I spent the rest of the day laying as still as I could, spy on Victoria. Every time I heard her go to the computer, I would crack my eyes in hopes of getting the password. And it wasn't until it was quite late and I was actually getting tired enough to go to real sleep that I watched her use the password and made a mental note of it I repeated it over and over until it became imprinted on my brain.
Then I just had to wait for an opportunity to use it.
Not long after, a phone call came in and pulled Victoria away. As soon as the door closed heavily, I sat up in bed. I had messed with the restraints in the other location and had finally gotten them loose enough to just slip off. It's not that they needed to know that. Not knowing how much time I had left, I walked over to the computer and quickly typed in Victoria's password. The computer fired up. I grabbed a pen and notepad and began writing down every interesting thing that I came across. Most of it was experimental data in files that were more recent than the binders that she had shown me. But then I saw another document that caught my attention. It said Alpha King agreements on the folder, and I couldn't help but click it. A contract or agreement of sorts popped up on the screen, and I was shocked. I knew that the Alpha King must have known or realized that he was not my real father, but to actually make a deal with the devil was much lower than I expected for him. I backed out of it and then noticed another file that caught my attention, one that said Control Project Alan on it. It couldn't be the same Alan, right? My curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked and opened that folder as well. I knew I didn't have much time, but I had to know. The folder contained files discussing Alan's life and how he was caught hypnotizing his wife. This couldn't be a coincidence. This must be why Alan was so intent on helping Simon as well. I copied down all of the information I could before. I thought it was past a safe amount of time before I got back in my bed. The notes got shoved in my underwear where I knew that nobody would find them. I exited the program and noticed a picture album in the bottom corner. When I clicked on it, I was shocked to see Joan's face in the first picture, along with my mother and a man who must have been my father. Joan looked much younger in the photo, but I was more focused on my mom and dad. My parents looked happy. I noticed that I had my father's ears, which made me smile. I thought about printing the picture, but knew that I wouldn't have the space for that as well. My underwear was only so big. Every time I thought I was done, I kept finding more information. There was another file that I just now spotted that was called an anti-gene fusion technology, and I remembered what Simon had said. He had told me that my blood was the answer, my genes, that they could heal or fix all of the current mutated shifters, but also could destroy this lab. I clicked on the folder, and inside was none other than Victoria's core formula. I gasped and grabbed the paper out of my underwear, frantically writing it as fast as I could. If I had the formula, then I could see exactly where the problem is with the experiment. And I was starting to get worried. I was at the computer for quite a while, and Victoria had to be coming back soon, so I hurried and logged out before jumping back up onto the bed to lie down. Just as I was getting settled back in, the alarm began to wail around me, and I saw lights flashing in the corners. I sat up and looked around, not sure what was going on and what I should do. That's when I noticed Victoria standing in the doorway, staring at me. My stomach leapt into my throat. So much for my unconscious plan. She was looking at me enough that I knew she saw me on her computer, at least. Victoria stared at me and only me as the alarm continued to wail around us, not paying any attention or caring about it. Why would she not be responding to said drill? Unless she knew what it was already. I could feel it in my bones. It was Simon, and he was here to get me. Hopefully, I wasn't dreaming this time. This part has ended. Thank you for listening. If you would like to continue listening to the next part, please let me know by leaving a comment.